Hello, Ryan here, aka Mac, and welcome. Today I would like to break down the Vehicle Experience AMA, which happened over on Spectrum this last week. As always, a huge thank you to all of my patrons and channel members who allow me to make these kinds of videos, in particular to my latest patron, Will Christie, and a big thank you to Gawain for rejoining as a channel member. So on Wednesday, the Vehicle Experience team took to Spectrum to answer all of our questions. This spoke a lot about ship combat, balancing, and upcoming features to further develop these systems as a whole, so let us dive in. First question is, currently combat is cluttered with UI of players' names and icons all over the screen. Is there plans to streamline this information and declutter the screen? And they say there is definitely plans to be able to filter different kinds of radar contacts at different times, for example choosing to only see friendlies, turrets, minables, and so on. Now I also expect that this new reworked UI for each manufacturer of ship will help alleviate this, plus the combination with the improved radar scanning and ping updates coming in Q2, it'll hopefully clear up a lot of the information we have on screen and just allow us to have more choice as to what to see. Next question is, will Geforce mechanics make a return? And they say yes, they do want proper Geforce exhaustion effects, but the focus right now is on capacitor gameplay. So leading on from that, will capacitors replace or eliminate thruster overheat? They said capacitor gameplay will be used to drive short-term consequences of using your ship systems, while heat will be moved to longer term. So the idea is, and the numbers are not official here, only an example, but in a 1 minute dogfight, heat won't matter all that much, whereas if the fight went on for 10 minutes or longer, then heat will begin to become an issue that needs managing. Next question is, space combat feels more like FPS shooters in space. Has the team given considerations to the aspects of the ship flight model? And they say they have heavily invested in achieving a good combat geometry, which is the way that ships can move around each other. They are approaching this from both a mathematical and an experiential viewpoint. Ultimately, they don't want the flight model to feel like it's on rails or like you're controlling a camera, but they still want to give us a proper 6 degrees of freedom experience. The development of capacitor systems is actually based on that demand, as that will allow them to add more variation into dogfighting to create a meaningful and fun experience. Talking more about capacitor gameplay, someone asked if there's any new features that they have planned for this year, and they are very excited for this capacitor gameplay, and this will change how players manage their available energy and how it changes the combat dynamics, but also how the balance will change because of this, as thrusters, shields and weapons will all have to adapt and be rebalanced to deliver the short-term and long-term dynamics. Now I'm really happy to hear that they are doing a deep rebalancing, as it's been needed for quite a while now, similar to the mining changes that came in 3.12. It really reshaped mining after that balance, so let us hope that the same happens for combat in 3.13 and beyond. What's the difference between capacitors and the power triangle? Capacitors, they say, will be a separate system, and so they are reviewing how existing features like the power triangle can possibly change to give more of the gameplay that they want, while not stepping on the toes of other systems. Will you evaluate comparative fighter stats to identify underperforming and overperforming ships with a view to tuning balance? And they say they are consistently evaluating ships, and events like the Xeno threat, which is now just finished, are a great way for them to further understand the balance that they currently have. Talking of balance, why is ship tuning and balance not a higher priority is the next question. And they say it is a high priority, but with so many ships and items, there is a lot of elements to take into consideration. For example, thrusters, power consumption, heat, and so on. So changing one thing might feel good at the time, but it can have a lot of unforeseen consequences. It's incredibly complex, and going through everything takes time, but they will get there step by step. Now, we have seen quite a lot of balance passes last year for many ships, but there are still so many other ships that are either not up to the same standard or have become the new meta. I do feel for the teams doing the balancing, as there are so many ships to take into consideration, plus there is only so much they can do right now until features like physical damage, physical components, and upcoming changes to thrusters that will throw it all off again and continuously need balancing. But each patch, they do get closer. So similar to the last question, the Talon and Arrow are more effective fighters at the moment. Are there plans to update other light or medium fighters to be more like these ships, or will you decrease the abilities of these two ships? Now they do plan to move specific fighters closer together in terms of performance, and the changes to these ships will depend on the result of multiple changes that they have planned for how combat will work. So again, some ships feel better than others as they have seen more attention. This is why the current pre-alpha PU is kind of a double-edged sword. It's great for testing all these ships, balancing and tuning while the rest of the game is getting developed, especially as when the game is ready for a version 1 release, this kind of testing will already have been done thoroughly, but at the same time it can mean that some people's ships are unable to keep up with other ships, and of course we don't like that. Eventually they will all be tuned and balanced to their respective roles and across the board. Is there any information on a landing camera and having it show the terrain below? They say they have definitely discussed the need for a landing camera, and although it's not on their short-term schedule, the docking feature uses a point-of-view camera, which we saw in Inside Star Citizen recently, so the future is bright for a landing camera. It does sound as though they do intend to provide a camera for pilots to use when landing, which will be obviously a big help, especially for the larger ships, but nothing soon, unfortunately. I do hope that they can integrate it with the ship MFDs though. Next question is, will multi-crewing ships ever balance to be able to compete with the same amount of players in separate ships? Now they say there is no simple answer to this, as it all depends on the chosen ships and what they're meant to do. A second crew seat doesn't automatically mean twice the combat performance or effectiveness, but they obviously do want the crew seats to matter and make a difference. So crew seats will be a force multiplier, just not necessarily by a factor of 2. Now this kind of goes for everything. I see a lot of people asking questions about ships or money making methods not being viable at the moment, and if CIG plan to make them viable. Of course they do. They won't introduce anything and just leave it as is, especially not during the alpha stage. If something doesn't feel right in the current alpha, they will eventually ensure everything has its place and is balanced appropriately before the game is officially released, so do not worry. Next question, do you think future systems like armor, physical damage and so on will allow ship combat to organically shift into the non-meta style gameplay that CIG are looking for, or is there more to be done to achieve that? Now they said that that is the plan. These systems should push the combat more organically into an area that they're more happy with. But it isn't just armor and physical damage, it's the performance of the ships, the weapon balance, and how multi-crew gameplay changes the dynamics. Personally, I am very excited to see these systems come online and just see how they affect combat. At the end of the day, each ship will have its strengths and weaknesses, but ultimately it will be down to the pilot or crew to utilize those strengths, which will be the main driving force of how effective all the ships can be. Next question is, are there plans soon to increase ship specialization or focus of the ships to their intended roles? And they say yes, a lot of the work this year that they're doing will entail to change the tunings and abilities of the ships to fit their intended roles and purposes. The rough plans were already laid out during the combat summit, but doing the actual work will take some time to complete. Very happy to hear that the ships will get more refinement into what role they're intended for. I think if the ships and weapons had more balance across the board, then combat in the persistent universe would feel so much more interesting, as right now some ships are just the obvious go-to and others are left alone. So if this year could tune and balance ships more to their role, it'll hopefully bring more viable ship options to the combat arena. Next question, are there any plans to roll back gimbal assist, or is it settled for good? Now, the amount of gimbal assist and other aiming helpers are heavily dependable on combat speeds, network performance, pip stability and other factors, and as these factors change, they will continue to reevaluate whether these assists are needed to increase or decrease. So no, they're not set in stone. Someone asked whether all the ships will receive light and door panels like we have in the Mercury Star Runner, and yes, this is all planned, and they say all the new ships are having this built in during production, and they will retroactively add them to all the existing ones as they go back into other fixes. Someone asked if there's any idea to how to combat Pip Wiggle, which is a bit of an exploit at the moment. Now they are aware of this problem and it's caused by several issues. They have already tried out a couple of things, but working with prediction is not the easiest topic, so at the moment they're not confident that they have found a good solution, but it is high priority due to its impact. So they will look further into this. I'm very happy to hear that. With the missile operator mode, do you want torpedoes of size 9 and above to feel more strategic, fired from afar after planning, or more tactical dogfighting approach like smaller missiles? Now the goal for this missile operator mode is that the firing of a missile or torpedo becomes a much bigger event and is a specific choice that we make at the time to engage. If fired at a long distance, you do open yourself up to more risk. For example, the missile can be deflected with countermeasures, intercepted by other ships, or even destroyed by turrets. But at the same time, they also want fighting closer to the target to be risky in other ways. However, it can increase chances for a successful hit. So I guess it's just giving us the options to try various tactics and find out what works for us, but I do think it'll likely depend heavily on the ship that you're attacking as well. Next question, is a more realistic friction simulation planned for ground vehicles? And yes, they are planning a complete overhaul to ground vehicles that will bring more realistic physics and behaviour. Now, Ground Vehicles version 2 is on the roadmap progress tracker for work I think happening around November this year, with it stating updating and improving ground vehicle movement parameters and simulation for more robust tuning and identity between various ground vehicles. So it's a shame that it's not until November, but I am happy that they will be addressing this year. Next question, what's happening with component subtargeting and disabling ships? Now they do plan to add more deep mechanics to subtargeting to allow us to target specific components that go beyond just engines and turrets, and I'm assuming they will need physical components first before we can really be able to shoot at them. And this year it appears that we will be getting physicalized shield emitters that can be destroyed, so that will likely be the starting point. So next question is, why are the Afterburner overheat ceilings so drastically different between fighters? Now they say this is based on the dynamics between the amount of thrusters and how much cooling and power they require. Again, capacitor gameplay, all items and ships will be taken under scrutiny, and they are trying to improve that. Someone asked if there are more realistic atmospheric flight behaviours planned, and they say yes, the goal is to make light fighters at least behave more like modern jet fighters, as they move the movement from manoeuvring thrusters to control surfaces, which allows ships to perform more extreme behaviours in atmosphere. Now this should be happening this year and will mean the addition of flaps and ailerons that allow us to glide and use aerodynamics instead of our thrusters, which will make atmospheric flight feel incredible and more like a flight simulator. And the final question is, will the Nova Tonk have independent track movement? And they say yes it will, it'll behave like a real world tank. So there we go, nothing really new learnt from this AMA, and a lot of it is just we are planning to. The Combat Summit has recently happened, and so they have been putting together an action plan for what to work on. So throughout each patch this year, we should be seeing more coming to the PU. Personally, I am most excited just simply for balancing and tuning the ships that we have now to behave more as they're designed to and intended to. This I feel will give people more incentive to use other ships or the ships that they've bought rather than what is currently the meta ship, and it will allow us to get more skilled in the ships that we actually choose. But with that said, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing and helping the channel to grow. Also, if you want to be notified when my videos go live, tick that little notification bell. If you could do the channel a big favour and hit that thumbs up, I would very much appreciate it. And if you want to talk more about Star Citizen, follow the link in the description to my Twitch channel. It is twitch.tv/supermacbrothers. These videos are made possible thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members, so a big thank you to you guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.